An arrogant millionaire arrives at a repair shop where three mechanics fail to fix his luxury car. An 8-year-old orphan girl steps forward and says, "Sir, I know how to fix your car." He shouts for everyone to hear, "If you fix my car, I'll adopt you," as the whole workshop bursts into cruel laughter. But when she grabs a tool and does something no one expected, the silence that follows changes everything. The air that Thursday afternoon was a thick, suffocating blanket, heavy with the smell of burnt oil and the distant perfume of sun-scorched asphalt. Arthur Vance felt a bead of sweat trace a path down his temple, a personal affront to the Italian silk of his shirt. He hated everything about this place. The dust settling on his $800 leather shoes, the shrill clang of a wrench dropping on the concrete floor, and above all, the humiliating inertia of his German sedan, a machine of perfection that now refused to obey. For 45 minutes, he'd been trapped in this purgatory of grease and incompetence, and his patience, already a scarce resource, had been completely depleted. Three men in stained overalls circled the car like confused vultures, their brows furrowed in a pathetic display of useless effort. "It's the electronics, Mr. Vance," one of them said, the oldest, wiping his hands on a rag that had once been white. "These imported cars, they're finicky as hell." Arthur clenched his fists. Finicky. That car represented more than transportation. It was a symbol of his power, of his ability to bend the world to his will, and now it was being defeated by being finicky. He glanced at his wristwatch, a Swiss masterpiece worth more than the entire garage. He was late for the board meeting. Millions were on the line. But here he was, hostage to three men whose greatest ambition seemed to be the lunch whistle. "Unbelievable," he muttered, his voice laced with an icy contempt. "I pay a fortune for cutting-edge engineering only to end up depending on this." He gestured vaguely at the surroundings, a sweep that encompassed the men, the tools, and the very mediocre existence of the place. Frustration bubbled within him, fueled by something deeper than a simple delay. It was the memory of his daughter Clara's disappointed look the night before when he cancelled dinner for the third time. It was the echo of his ex-wife Helena's words about how he only knew how to build empires and destroy homes. Every tick of the watch was a reminder of his failures he buried under layers of work and arrogance. That's when he saw her, a small, thin figure, standing near a pile of old tires, almost blending into the shadows. She was a girl, maybe 8 years old, with tangled hair, a grimy face, and bare feet on the greasy concrete. Her eyes, large and serious, were fixed on the open engine of his car, watching the mechanics with an intensity that belied her frail appearance. Arthur ignored her. Just another unpleasant detail in this miserable setting, but the girl moved. With hesitant steps, she approached the circle of men who didn't even notice her, too engrossed in their failure. She drew near Arthur, stopping at a respectful distance. He sensed the movement and turned his head down, contempt clear in his expression. "What do you want?" he growled. The girl flinched but didn't retreat. She lifted her gaze and, in a voice so quiet it was almost a whisper, uttered words that seemed to suspend time. "Sir," she said, "I know how to fix your car." For an instant, there was absolute silence, broken only by the buzz of a lone fly. Then came the laughter. First from the youngest mechanic, a loud, mocking sound. Then the other two joined in, cruel guffaws echoing through the garage. Arthur felt a wave of perverse relief. The humiliation he felt now had a target. He smiled, a sharp, cruel smile, and turned so everyone could hear him. "Oh, you do you?" he boomed, sarcasm dripping from every syllable. "A little mechanical genius. Well then, let's make a deal." He leaned down, invading the child's space, and proclaimed loudly, "If you fix my car, I'll adopt you." The laughter exploded. louder and crueler than before, as the girl remained motionless, her serious eyes still fixed on him, completely indifferent to the storm of scorn he had just created around her. The laughter died down slowly, like the last gasp of a sputtering engine. What remained was an awkward silence, filled only by the mockery hanging in the air. The mechanics glanced at each other, dopey grins still on their faces, waiting for Arthur's reaction. He, in turn, crossed his arms in a gesture of theatrical impatience. The joke had landed, but now the kid was spoiling the effect with her stubborn silence. He opened his mouth to dismiss her, to cast her back into the shadows she'd come from, but she moved first, completely ignoring the millionaire and his audience. The girl walked to the large red toolbox. Her movements were deliberate, lacking the hesitation typical of a child in a strange environment. She didn't look at the baffled faces around her. Her eyes were focused, as if following an invisible map in her mind. Her small hands, with dirty fingernails and tiny calluses, rummaged through a drawer with unnerving familiarity, bypassing wrenches and pliers until she found what she was looking for, a small socket wrench with a slim extender. Arthur raised an eyebrow. That was a specific tool. The oldest mechanic took a step forward, an objection forming in his throat, but something in the girl's posture made him stop. There was a quiet authority in her gestures that defied her age and appearance. She returned to the car, the cool metal of the tool in her hand. Without needing a stool, she stretched, snaking her arm into the labyrinth of wires and tubes in the engine with surgical precision. For a moment, her face disappeared from view, and all they could see was her small, fragile body bent over the complex machine. Arthur felt a pang of irritation. What was this farce? He was letting a street kid play around in a $100,000 engine. He was about to yell to put an end to this charade when he heard a click, a small, metallic, definitive sound. The girl pulled back from the engine. She wiped her hand on the side of her tattered dress and turned to him. Her large, dark eyes met his, and she gave a simple nod toward the driver's seat. "You can start it now." Her voice was a thread, but it cut through the silence like a blade. The youngest mechanic let out a nervous chuckle. "Oh, sure. The magic is done." Arthur, feeling the weight of all eyes on him, walked to the car door with heavy steps, his face a mask of skepticism. He sat on the soft leather, the new car smell contrasting violently with the surroundings. He inserted the key into the ignition, his movement slow and deliberate, preparing for the humiliating silence that would follow. He turned the key. The engine didn't hesitate, it didn't sputter. It roared to life, a powerful, smooth sound, the perfect symphony of German engineering, as if it had never faltered. The steady purr filled the garage, drowning out all thought. Arthur sat with his hand on the key, paralyzed. Outside, the three mechanics stood with their mouths agape, their faces a mixture of astonishment and shame. The silence that followed the engine's sound was deeper and heavier than any noise. All the arrogance, all the contempt, and all the mockery had evaporated, leaving behind only the shocking, undeniable image. A barefoot girl had done in 2 minutes what 3 professionals couldn't manage in almost an hour. Arthur turned off the car and got out slowly. He looked at the girl, who wasn't smiling or showing any sign of triumph. She simply watched him, waiting. The weight of his own cruel words fell on him like an anvil. "If you fix my car, I'll adopt you." The sentence echoed in his mind, no longer a joke, but a judgment. The girl took a step forward, her bare feet silent on the dirty floor, and stopped before him. She raised her face, and with a seriousness that disarmed him completely, asked in her soft voice, "So, where are we going now?" The girl's question hung in the dense air of the garage, disarming Arthur with its devastating simplicity. "Where are we going now?" There was no irony in her voice, not a hint of malice, just a calm, literal acceptance of the absurd promise he had made in a fit of rage. The mechanics, once so boisterous, now stared at the floor, at their tools, at anywhere but the millionaire's face. Their humiliation had morphed into a kind of silent witness, and Arthur felt cornered by his own mouth. His brain, accustomed to closing multi-billion-dollar deals and crushing competitors, shifted into damage control mode. The solution was obvious, the same one he used for every inconvenient problem in his life: money. He crouched down, trying to force a paternal expression that looked more like a grimace. "Look, kid," he began, his voice lowered, conspiratorial. "That was a joke, a gag, but you were very clever. You're brilliant, in fact." He pulled his wallet from the inner pocket of his jacket, a gesture as natural to him as breathing. He peeled off a wad of $100 bills, enough to feed a family for months. "Here, buy yourself whatever you want. A new dress, shoes, lots of shoes." He held out the money, expecting her eyes to light up, but childish greed to solve his public gaffe. The girl looked at the bills, then back at his face. She didn't reach out. Instead, she tilted her head, a confused wrinkle forming between her eyebrows. "But you promised," she said, not with accusation, but as a statement of fact. The simple sentence hit him harder than any legal argument. In that moment, he wasn't Arthur Vance, the titan of industry. He was just a man who had made a promise to a child, and the three men in overalls were the jury. Shame burned on his face. He couldn't just leave her there. The story would be all over town before his car engine cooled. The arrogant Vance, humiliated by a street kid and then abandoning her. It would be a stain on his impeccably crafted reputation. With a resigned sigh, he put the money away. "Fine, get in the car," he said, his voice clipped, the taste of defeat bitter on his tongue. The girl didn't hesitate. She walked to the passenger door and, with a surprising dignity, got into the car, placing her bare feet carefully on the cream-colored velvet floor mat. Arthur got in the driver's side, shutting the door with more force than necessary. The silence inside the luxury vehicle was oppressive. He could smell the dust and the street on her. A foreign scent in his sterilized world. He pulled out of the garage without a backward glance, feeling the mechanic's eyes on his back. He drove aimlessly, the city streets blurring past. His mind was in chaos. What was he supposed to do with her? Drop her at an orphanage? Call social services? Every option felt like an admission of defeat. "What's your name?" he asked abruptly, more to break the silence than out of curiosity. "Lena," she replied, her voice soft. He drove for a few more blocks. He needed time to think, a neutral venue, a restaurant. He'd feed her, ask some questions, and then figure out a permanent solution. He pulled up in front of the most expensive restaurant in the city, a place where he used to take clients to impress them. It was an automatic gesture, resorting to luxury as a tool. He turned to her, the plan forming. "Let's get something to eat. Then you're going to tell me where you live, and I'll take you home." Lena looked at the imposing facade of the restaurant, then at him, her dark eyes seeming to see through every layer of his armor. She didn't answer immediately, just watched him for a long moment. Then, with the same calm honesty that was undoing him piece by piece, she said, "I don't have a home to go back to." Lena's words, "I don't have a home to go back to," fell into the silence of the luxury car like stones in a still lake. Each syllable created ripples of complication that spread through Arthur's carefully controlled universe. He had anticipated tears, maybe a sob story invented to win his sympathy, but her declaration was devoid of self-pity. It was a fact, as concrete as the leather of the seat beneath his fingers. He looked at her, truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time. He saw the deep weariness in her eyes, an exhaustion no 8-year-old should know. He saw the grime under her nails, not as neglect, but as a testament to her survival. The arrogance that defined him began to fracture, and beneath it, an uncomfortable, forgotten feeling began to stir: responsibility. Leaving her at a fancy restaurant suddenly seemed a grotesque idea. What would she do after the meal was over? He couldn't just hand her off to some authority and wash his hands of it. His promise, made in mockery, now chained him to her. He needed a plan, but his brain, so sharp for business strategies, felt sluggish and heavy. He started the car again, pulling away from the restaurant. He didn't know where he was going, only that he needed a safe place, a place where he could think without the judgment of snobbish waiters. His penthouse. The idea surfaced as the only viable option. It was his impersonal sanctuary of glass and steel, a place where no one ever entered uninvited. Bringing a street kid there was a violation of his own unwritten rules. But what other choice did he have? During the drive, Lena remained silent. Watching the city pass by the window, she didn't seem awed by the car's interior or the skyscrapers they passed. There was a stillness about her, a passive acceptance of events that was both unnerving and intriguing. When they arrived at Arthur's building, a monolith of luxury with a uniformed doorman, he felt a pang of hesitation. He could feel the doorman's curious gaze as he guided the barefoot girl across the marble lobby. In the private elevator, the mirror reflected their image. Him, tall, impeccable in his expensive suit, an expression of restrained frustration. Her, small, dirty, an expression of calm observation. They looked like characters from two different worlds, forced to share the same frame. The penthouse was vast and silent, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. The decor was minimalist and cold, more like an art gallery than a home. Lena stopped at the entrance, her small, dirty feet looking like a desecration on the polished hardwood floors. "You can come in," Arthur said, his voice sounding strangely loud in the silence. I'll find you something to eat." He went to the kitchen, a stainless steel space he rarely used, and opened the refrigerator. It was nearly empty, save for bottles of imported water, a lone lemon, and a jar of olives. His life was a series of business lunches and food deliveries. He never needed to stock food. A fresh wave of inadequacy hit him. He could command an empire, but he couldn't find a sandwich for a hungry child. He returned to the living room, feeling like a complete fool. Lena hadn't moved, but her eyes were fixed on a framed photograph on the wall. It was the only personal photo in the entire apartment. Him, his ex-wife Helena, and their daughter Clara, smiling on a sunny day years ago. It was a relic of a life he had methodically dismantled. Lena looked from the photo to him. Her eyes lingered on his face in the picture, on the genuine smile he barely remembered having. "You looked happy," she observed, without judgment. Her simple comment was like a knife. He wasn't prepared for her perception, for her ability to see past the facade. He felt exposed, vulnerable. Just then, his phone rang, the sharp sound shattering the tension. It was Helena. His heart sank. Her voice was icy, as it always was. "Arthur, I need to talk to you. It's about Clara, and about a very strange story I just heard from someone who was at Sal's garage this afternoon." Helena's voice on the phone was like ice forming over an already frozen lake. Each word was precise, sharp, and weighted with years of disappointment. Arthur felt the blood run cold in his veins. The news had traveled faster than his luxury car. Sal's garage was a city microcosm, a place where gossip was traded as often as motor oil. He moved away from Lena, turning to the panoramic window, as if the vastness of the city could dilute the intensity of the moment. "Helena, I can explain," he started, his voice firm out of habit, but inside he felt the ground disintegrating. "Explain what, Arthur? That you thought it was funny to publicly humiliate an orphaned child? That you made a cruel promise just to entertain a few mechanics?" Her voice trembled with restrained rage. "Clara heard about it. A friend's mother told her. Do you have any idea how she felt, hearing that her father made a joke about adopting another child when he barely has time for her?" The blow was direct and precise. The mention of Clara, his 10-year-old daughter, was the one weapon Helena knew could still wound him deeply. Every word was an indictment not just of his casual cruelty to Lena, but of his ongoing failure as a father. He closed his eyes, the image of Clara's disappointed face superimposing itself over the city skyline. It wasn't like that, he tried, but the words sounded hollow even to him. I don't care what it was like, Arthur. The fact is, it happened. And this will be used in our next custody hearing. It shows a pattern of behavior, a lack of judgment that I don't want near my daughter. The threat hung in the air, cold and final. The custody battle for Clara was the most painful fight of his life, a war he was losing not for lack of resources, but for lack of presence. He was a father of weekends and cancelled holidays, an expert in broken promises. "Helena, please," he said, the power and authority draining from his voice, leaving only raw desperation. "I have the girl with me now. I'm trying to fix this." There was a shocked pause on the other end of the line. "You what? Yet you took her home with you? Have you completely lost your mind?" Before he could answer, the line went dead. Helena had hung up. Arthur stood there, the phone still pressed to his ear, the sound of the dead line echoing the emptiness in his chest. He had managed in a single afternoon to exponentially worsen his already fragile relationship with his family. The door to reconciliation, which he secretly kept ajar in his heart, felt like it had been slammed shut. He turned and met Lena's eyes. She had heard everything. There was no way she couldn't have. Her expression was unreadable, a calm that unsettled him even more. She didn't look scared or intimidated by the anger in the conversation. She just watched, absorbing. "I made trouble for you," she said, not as a question but a statement. "With your family." Arthur opened his mouth to deny it, to say the fault was entirely his, but the raw honesty of the situation silenced him. Yes, she was the catalyst, but the explosion had been caused by his own arrogance. He felt like a man caught in a trap of his own making. He needed to do something, to act. He approached her, his mind now focused on a new urgency, proving to Helena, and perhaps to himself, that he wasn't the monster she painted him to be. "First, let's get you taken care of," he said, his voice taking on a practical tone. "A bath, clean clothes, food." He led her to the guest bathroom, a luxurious and rarely used room. He opened the closet and pulled out one of his expensive cotton dress shirts. "Wear this for now. Tomorrow, we'll buy you some clothes." He was operating on autopilot, focusing on logistical tasks to avoid the emotional whirlwind threatening to engulf him. While the shower ran, he went to the kitchen and, in an act of desperation, called a high-end grocery delivery service, ordering an assortment of foods he thought a child might like. As he waited, he paced his sterile living room. He looked again at the photo on the wall, at the image of the happy family he had lost. He wasn't that smiling man. He was the man who yelled at his ex-wife on the phone while a hungry child waited in his bathroom. The shower stopped. A moment later, Lena appeared in the doorway. His shirt was a dress on her, reaching her ankles. Her wet hair was combed back, and her face, free of grime, looked younger and infinitely more vulnerable. But the most shocking transformation was the mark now visible on her arm, previously hidden by dirt, a long, old, whitish scar that snaked from her wrist to her elbow. The scar on Lena's arm was a pale line against her clean skin, a silent map of a past pain. Arthur couldn't look away. In his world of contracts and balance sheets, wounds were abstract, confined to clauses and market losses. This mark was physical, real, and unsettling. It told a story he didn't know, a story that made him even more aware of the vastness of his ignorance about the girl now in his home. He felt an impulse to ask, but something in the way Lena held her arm slightly against her body stopped him. It was a subtle gesture of self-protection, an invisible barrier he had no right to cross. He swallowed the question, his gaze shifting to the grocery delivery that had just arrived. "The food is here," he announced, his voice a little too loud. "Let's see what we've got." He unpacked the bags on the massive marble kitchen island, revealing an assortment of breads, cheeses, fruits, and yogurts. He felt like a fool. He had no idea what she liked, what an 8-year-old ate. He had bought what he thought was nutritious, a logical choice devoid of any warmth. Lena approached slowly, her eyes scanning the items with a restrained curiosity. She picked up a bright red apple, holding it in both hands as if it were a treasure. "Thank you," she whispered, and took a small bite. As she ate, perched on one of the high stools at the kitchen island, Arthur felt like an observer in his own home. He watched her, trying to piece together the puzzle she presented. Her intelligence was obvious, not just in how she fixed the car, but in her keen perception. She didn't say much, but when she did, her words carried weight. Where did she learn about engines? How did she survive on her own? And the scar? The questions swirled in his mind, but the tense conversation with Helena had made him wary. He knew every step he took from now on would be scrutinized, judged. After Lena finished eating, an uncomfortable silence settled in again. Night was falling over the city, the lights twinkling on like a carpet of diamonds outside. It was late. He had an immaculate guest room, but the thought of just putting her in there and closing the door felt wrong. It felt like another act of abandonment. "You must be tired," he said, trying to sound gentle. "Dude, the guest room is this way." He led her to a room that was as impersonal as the rest of the penthouse, with a large bed made up with crisp white linens and designer furniture that had never been used. Lena looked around, her eyes widening slightly at the size of the bed. "I can sleep on the floor," she offered, her voice low. "I'm used to it." The statement hit him like a punch to the gut. The casualness with which she said it revealed a world of hardship he could barely imagine. "Don't be silly," he replied, his voice sharper than he intended, to mask the discomfort he felt. "The bed is for sleeping." He left her there, closing the door softly behind him. He went back to the living room and poured himself a glass of whiskey. The amber liquid burned his throat, but failed to calm the storm in his mind. He was a man who controlled everything, yet he was in completely uncharted territory. He had a stranger in his home. His ex-wife was mounting a legal war, and he felt more alone than ever. Later, unable to sleep, he walked past the hallway and noticed a sliver of light from under the guest room door. Curiosity got the better of him. He approached silently and peeked through the crack. Lena wasn't in bed. She was sitting on the floor, her back to the door, in her hands. She held the small socket wrench she had used to fix his car. She had taken it from the pocket of the large shirt he'd given her. Under the lamplight, he saw her polishing the tool with a piece of the shirt's hem, her movements slow and reverent, as if tending to a sacred object. She wasn't playing, it was a ritual. A flashback hit him, a long-buried memory. Him, 10 years old, in his grandfather's dusty basement, polishing an old brass compass. The only thing he had left of him. It was a link to a past he felt he had lost. In that moment, he understood that the tool in Lena's hands was more than just a tool. It was a connection, a memory, perhaps the only thing she had from someone she loved. The image of her, so small and alone, tending to that piece of metal, broke something inside him. The irritation and frustration gave way to an emotion he hadn't felt in years, an overwhelming wave of compassion. The next day, determined to do the right thing, he took her shopping for clothes. As she was trying on a simple dress in a department store, he got a call from his lawyer. The man's voice was grave. "Arthur, I have bad news. Helena has filed an emergency motion to suspend your visitation rights, and that's not all. A downtown shop owner filed a police report against an unidentified girl for petty theft of food. The description matches your protégé. They're looking for her." The lawyer's voice, Mark's voice, sounded distant, as if coming from the other end of a tunnel. An emergency motion, a police report, petty theft. The words collided in Arthur's mind, creating a cacophony of panic and urgency. He looked through the department store window at Lena, who was studying herself in a mirror with a neutral expression, the simple blue dress hanging awkwardly on her thin frame. She looked so small, so oblivious to the legal storm gathering around her, a storm he had helped create. "Do they know she's with me?" Arthur asked, his voice low and tense, turning to face away from the store as if he could shield Lena from the world with his own body. "Not yet," Mark replied, "but it won't take long. The story from the garage is out. A millionaire and a mysterious street kid. It's the kind of thing the local news blogs love. The pieces will come together in a matter of hours. The police will connect the dots, and Helena will use this to paint you as someone harboring a fugitive to manipulate the justice system." The lawyer's cold logic was flawless and terrifying. Arthur felt the walls closing in. Every good intention he'd had since taking her from the garage was being twisted, weaponized against him. Buying her clothes, giving her shelter, all of it could be seen as obstructing justice. The irony was cruel. For the first time in years, he had tried to do something that wasn't for his own benefit, and it was threatening to destroy what was left of his family life. He ended the call with Mark, a wave of nausea rising in his throat. He looked back at Lena. She had taken off the dress and was back in his oversized shirt. She saw him and walked over, her new sneakers looking oddly large on her feet. "You didn't like the dress?" he asked, his voice sounding forced. She shrugged. "It's just a dress." Her indifference to material things was an uncomfortable mirror to his own life, built on acquiring symbols of status. In that moment, he made a decision, an impulsive, reckless, and perhaps the most honest decision he had ever made. He would not turn her in. He would not throw her to the wolves, whether they were police, social workers, or the fury of his ex-wife. He would protect her, no matter the cost. "Let's get out of here," he said, taking her gently by the shoulder. He paid for the clothes and shoes in a hurry and led her out of the mall, his eyes scanning the crowd, looking for faces that might be watching. Paranoia was a new feeling for him. In his car, he drove, not to his penthouse, which he now considered compromised, but to the only place that came to mind as a sanctuary, an old country house 2 hours from the city, inherited from his parents. It was a place he avoided, haunted by memories of a lonely childhood where his parents, as work-obsessed as he had become, would leave him with a housekeeper. It was a place of isolation, but now isolation was exactly what he needed. During the drive, he tried to be subtle. "Lena," he began, "sometimes people make mistakes when they're hungry, right? Take things they shouldn't." She remained silent for a long time, watching the urban landscape melt into green fields. When she finally spoke, her voice was firm. "I'm not a thief. I only took what I needed so I wouldn't starve, and I always left something in return." Arthur glanced at her, confused. "Left something in return? What do you mean?" "I fix things," she explained. "The squeaking door at the bakery, the wobbly wheel on Mr. Chen's fruit cart, the broken toaster at the diner. I would watch, find the problem, and when no one was looking, I'd fix it. It was my way of paying." Arthur was speechless. The revelation was a turning point, a paradigm shift in his understanding of her. She wasn't a criminal. She was a survivor with her own code of honor and an extraordinary skill. The image of her, a furtive child fixing the world's small breakdowns in exchange for a piece of bread, was so beautifully, profoundly sad that his heart ached. She wasn't just getting by. She was contributing, trying to balance the scales in her own small way. When they reached the country house, the sun was setting. The house was dusty and smelled of old wood and stopped time. It was a forgotten place. As he opened the windows to let in the fresh air, Lena explored with a quiet curiosity. She stopped in front of a small bookcase in the living room, her fingers tracing the spine of a thick, worn book. Arthur walked over. The book was an advanced mechanical engineering manual, one of many his father, a brilliant but emotionally distant engineer, used to study. "You like books?" he asked. Lena turned to him, her eyes serious. "My dad taught me how to read using manuals like this," she said, her soft voice laced with a painful nostalgia. "He was the best mechanic. He could listen to an engine and tell you exactly what was wrong. He taught me everything." Suddenly, the socket wrench, the ease with which she'd fixed his car, it all made sense. It wasn't just a raw talent, it was a legacy. And then she added the sentence that would change everything. He used to work for a very important man here in the city, a man he never met. He would create solutions for his company's engines. The company's name was Vance Motors. The name Vance Motors left Lena's lips with an innocent simplicity. But to Arthur, it landed like a detonation. His mind, already overloaded, struggled to process the information. Vance Motors was the heart of his empire, the first company he'd built from the ground up, the bedrock of his fortune. The idea that Lena's father, some anonymous mechanic, had any connection to his company was preposterous. He knew every chief engineer, every designer, every executive who had ever walked through his doors. There was no record of any neighborhood mechanic working as a consultant. That's not possible," he stammered, skepticism battling the strange certainty in her voice. "I would have known. All consultants report to me." Lena turned back to the bookshelf, her fingers still on the engineering manual. "He wasn't an official consultant," she explained, not looking at him. "He found a flaw in the fuel injection system on one of your first models. No one could figure it out. He drew a solution on a napkin and mailed it anonymously to the main office. They used the design. He never asked for credit. He was just happy he solved the puzzle." The story was so bizarre, so unlikely, that part of Arthur wanted to dismiss it as a child's fantasy, but the details, the fuel injection flaw on an early model, he vaguely remembered a persistent problem that had suddenly been solved by an anonymous fix his R&D team had assumed was developed in-house by some junior tech. He'd always chalked it up to a stroke of luck. Now, that luck had a face, the face of Lena's father. He sat down heavily in a dusty armchair, reality reconfiguring itself around him. The girl he had humiliated was not just an orphan with an inexplicable talent. She was the daughter of an anonymous genius whose brilliance he himself had indirectly exploited. The connection wasn't a coincidence. It was an invisible thread that had tied them together for years. This changed everything. His responsibility for her was no longer just the result of an impulsive promise. It felt fated, a karmic debt he never knew he owed. As night wrapped around the country house, a new kind of silence fell between them. It was no longer the awkward silence of two strangers, but a thoughtful quiet, full of unasked questions. He made a simple meal from the few provisions he found in the pantry, and they ate at the old wooden kitchen table. "What happened to him?" Arthur asked gently, the question he had been avoiding. "My father." Lena stopped eating, her eyes focused on an invisible spot on the table. "He got sick," she said, her voice flat, as if reciting a fact from a textbook. "Very sick. We spent all our money on doctors and medicine, but it didn't help. When he was gone, there was nothing left. The landlord made us leave, and here I am." There were no tears, no display of grief, just a void, a factual account of how her world had fallen apart. That lack of emotion was more heartbreaking than any sob. Arthur felt a tightness in his chest, a mix of guilt and admiration for this child's strength. He, with all his resources, fell apart in bitterness over losing his family to divorce, while she had faced total loss with a quiet resilience. Later that night, while Lena slept in one of the spare rooms, Arthur couldn't rest. He went to his father's small study, a room he hadn't set foot in for over a decade. He pulled open sticking drawers, the smell of old paper filling the air. He was looking for something, anything, that might corroborate Lena's story. In a rusted metal box tucked in the back of a cabinet, he found it, They were old files from Vance Motors, blueprints and reports from the early years, and there it was, a detailed report on the fuel injection system failure, and stapled to it, a yellowed cocktail napkin, a complex diagram hand-drawn on it in elegant script. There was no name, only the initials J.S. He stood there, under the dim light of a single desk lamp, the napkin trembling in his hands. It was real, all of it. Lena's father, J.S., was a brilliant ghost in the foundations of his empire. Suddenly, his phone buzzed in his pocket, shattering the dead quiet of the night. It was a text from Mark, his lawyer. Arthur, bad news. Helena got a P.I. He found the country house. They know you're there with the girl, and Child Protective Services has been notified. They're on their way. They'll be there in the morning. Mark's text glowed in the dark study, each word a beacon of impending disaster. Protective Services. On their way, morning time, which had seemed to stand still in this forgotten house, suddenly lurched forward, racing toward an unavoidable confrontation. Arthur felt a cold dread wash over him, a sense of powerlessness he despised. He, who moved markets and bent boards of directors to his will, was cornered in a dusty country house, awaiting the arrival of bureaucrats who would decide the fate of a child he barely knew, but now felt fiercely responsible for. His first instinct was to run, to grab Lena, get in the car, and disappear into the night. But where? He couldn't run forever. Every desperate move would only confirm Helena's narrative that he was unstable, reckless, and unfit. No, running wasn't an option. He had to face this, but on his own terms. He stayed up for the rest of the night, his mind working furiously. The napkin with Lena's father's design lay on the desk, a silent testament to the past that had so violently collided with his present. It wasn't just proof, it was a symbol of the debt he owed, not just to Lena, but to her father's memory. At dawn, the first rays of sun cut through the mist hanging over the fields, bringing with them the distant sound of a car approaching on the gravel road. Arthur was waiting on the porch, an untouched cup of coffee in his hands. He was dressed simply in jeans and a shirt, a deliberate attempt to shed the armor of the arrogant millionaire. He had woken Lena gently, explaining as calmly as he could that they were having visitors. She showed no fear, only the same quiet acceptance that continually amazed him. She sat on the porch step, the small socket wrench in her pocket, its outline visible through the fabric. Two cars pulled up. From one, a serious-looking man and woman emerged, both carrying briefcases. Social services. From the other car, to Arthur's shock and horror, stepped Helena. Her face was a mask of cold determination, and beside her was the private investigator, a man with a self-satisfied smirk. "Arthur," Helena said, her voice cutting through the morning air, completely ignoring Lena's presence. "It's over. You've gone too far." The social worker, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Davis, stepped forward. "Mr. Vance, I'm Mrs. Davis from the Department of Children and Families. We've received a disturbing report. We need to take the child into protective custody until her situation can be assessed." Arthur remained calm, a facade that cost him every ounce of his self-control. "I understand why you're here," he said, his voice even, "but there are facts you don't know." He turned to Lena. "Lena, would you mind waiting inside for a little bit?" She looked from Arthur to Helena, then to the social workers. With a dignity that contradicted her age, she stood up and went into the house, closing the door softly behind her. Once she was gone, Arthur focused on the newcomers. "I believe you've been told that I've abducted a runaway child," he began. "The truth is a little more complex," Helena snorted. "Don't give me your stories, Arthur. You humiliated her. And then when the story got out, you hid her to save your reputation." "I made a terrible mistake at the garage," Arthur admitted, looking directly at Helena, something he hadn't done in years. "My arrogance was inexcusable. But hiding Lena wasn't about saving my reputation. It was about protecting her. And it was about understanding something I've only just discovered. He turned to Mrs. Davis. This girl's father, a man named John Stevens, was a genius mechanic. Years ago, he saved my company from a costly recall with his brilliance. I never knew his name, never thanked him, never paid him. My fortune was built, in part, on his unrecognized genius, and I let his daughter live on the streets. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. This isn't about charity, Mrs. Davis. This is about righting a wrong, a debt I have a moral obligation to repay. Mrs. Davis and her colleague exchanged a glance. Her expression, once hard, softened with a flicker of uncertainty. Even Helena seemed momentarily shaken by Arthur's confession. He wasn't defending himself with arrogance, but with a raw vulnerability she had never seen in him. But then, the door to the house opened. Lena stood there, her face pale. In her hand, she held an old yellowed envelope that Arthur had never seen before. "I heard," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You're talking about my dad. He left this for me. He told me to only open it if I was in real trouble." She walked right up to Mrs. Davis and held out the envelope. "I think I'm in trouble now." All eyes were fixed on the yellowed envelope in Lena's hand. It was a fragile, time-stained object. But in that moment, it seemed to hold the weight of a vault. Mrs. Davis, the social worker, hesitated for an instant, her professional gaze wavering before the child's solemnity. She knelt slowly, bringing herself to Lena's eye level, a gesture of respect that didn't go unnoticed by Arthur. "Are you sure you want me to read this, honey?" she asked, her voice gentle. Lena nodded, her large eyes serious and certain. Carefully, as if handling an ancient artifact, Mrs. Davis took the envelope. Her fingers gingerly opened the sealed flap. Helena stepped forward, curiosity overcoming her hostility. Arthur held his breath, his heart pounding against his ribs. Inside the envelope were 2 folded documents and a small brass key. Mrs. Davis unfolded the first paper. It was a copy of Lena's birth certificate, official and in order. The second paper was a letter written in a steady, precise hand. She began to read aloud, her voice echoing in the morning quiet. "To whomever finds my daughter, Lena. If you are reading this, it means I am no longer here to protect her. There are no words for the pain of leaving her alone in this world, but know this. She is not weak. She is the most intelligent, resilient person I have ever known. She carries inside her all the knowledge I could give her. She can fix anything that is broken, from an engine to a heart, if given the chance." Arthur felt a lump form in his throat. The letter was a father's testament of love, a message in a bottle cast into the ocean of fate. Hoping the right person would find it, Mrs. Davis continued, "I have no family to turn to. Therefore, I leave this instruction, notarized and on record. I request that guardianship of my daughter be granted to a person who recognizes her value, not out of charity, but out of respect for her mind and spirit. Someone who understands that true engineering is not just in machines, but in building a future. If that person is you, please use the enclosed key to open Safe Deposit Box 7B at the City Central Bank. There you will find everything I managed to save for her future and the proof of my identity and my professional contributions." The letter was signed, John Stevens, father and mechanic. A profound silence followed the reading. Mrs. Davis looked at the document again and saw the notary's seal in the bottom corner, dated nearly a year ago. This wasn't just a letter, it was a will, a statement of last wishes. Helena looked at Arthur, and for the first time in a long time, her expression was not one of anger, but of a deep, confused bewilderment. Arthur's story wasn't a desperate fabrication. It had roots, it had proof. The man she despised was somehow at the center of a dying father's last wish. Mrs. Davis's colleague cleared his throat. This changes things. It complicates the situation." Mrs. Davis nodded, standing up. She looked at Arthur, her gaze now evaluative, no longer accusatory. "Mr. Vance, this letter expresses a wish, but it is not a legal adoption document. The process must be followed." Arthur stepped forward, his voice firm with a new resolve. "I know, and I will follow it. I'll do whatever it takes. I will go to the bank. I will hire the best lawyers. I will honor her father's request." He was looking at Lena, who watched him with a fragile hope in her eyes. Mrs. Davis sighed, the weight of her profession clear on her face. "I appreciate your intent, Mr. Vance, but until a judge decides, Lena is legally a ward of the state. I cannot, in good conscience, leave her here under these unstable circumstances. The theft complaint still exists, and your family situation with your ex-wife is a risk factor." Arthur's heart sank. After everything, they were still going to take her. "Please," he began. "And it's not a final no," she cut him off. "It's a not yet. My official decision is this: Lena will be placed in a safe, temporary foster home while we launch a full investigation. However," she paused, glancing at the letter in her hand, "given the extraordinary nature of these documents, I am going to give you a chance. You have exactly 48 hours to present a formal petition for guardianship to the family court. If you do so, the judge may grant you temporary custody while the case is reviewed. If you fail to do so, the process will follow its normal course, and she could be placed for adoption elsewhere. The clock starts now." Mrs. Davis's words, 48 hours, echoed on the porch, each second beginning to drain away like sand in a merciless hourglass. It was a near impossible deadline, a bureaucratic gauntlet designed to test his resolve to its breaking point. Arthur felt a flash of the old adrenaline he used to get before a hostile takeover, but this time the prize wasn't a company, it was a child's future. He watched as Mrs. Davis knelt again in front of Lena. "Lena, you're going to have to come with me for a little while," she said, her voice filled with a professional kindness. "It will be a safe place with other children, and I promise Mr. Vance will be able to visit you." Lena looked at Arthur, a silent question in her eyes. It wasn't fear, but a search for confirmation. He walked to her and knelt too, ignoring the dust on his jeans. He looked directly into her eyes. "I will fix this," he said, his voice low but charged with more conviction than he'd ever felt in his life. "I promised, and I will keep my promise. Just trust me." She studied him for a moment, then gave a nearly imperceptible nod. It was enough. As Lena walked toward the social services car, holding Mrs. Davis's hand, Helena approached Arthur. Her expression was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. "Arthur, she started, but the words failed her. She, who always had a sharp retort for everything, was at a loss. "The letter, her father, you really didn't know." "Not until last night," he answered, his eyes never leaving the departing car. "I was so arrogant, Helena, so blind to everything that wasn't my own reflection." The confession left him vulnerable, but he no longer cared. Pride had been the poison that corroded his marriage, his family. Maybe humility was the antidote. Helena stood in silence, watching the car disappear down the road. "Clara needs to know the truth," she said finally, her voice soft. "The whole story, not the garage gossip." It was an olive branch, a small gesture of peace in the middle of their war. Arthur felt a surge of gratitude so intense it almost made him dizzy. "Thank you," he whispered. As soon as the cars were gone, Arthur sprang into action. The clock was ticking. He called Mark, his lawyer. "Mark, scrap everything. New plan. I need an emergency guardianship petition, and I need it on a judge's desk in 48 hours. There was a shocked silence on the other end. "Arthur, that's impossible. These things take weeks, months. We need background checks, psychological evaluations, home visits." "We don't have months," Arthur cut him off, the command back in his voice. Find a loophole, use every resource we have, and I have something that might help." He held up the envelope with the brass key that Mrs. Davis had given him before she left. John Stevens left a safe deposit box at City Central Bank. "I need you to get a court order to open it immediately. There might be something in there that proves my suitability, that establishes the connection I never knew existed." The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity. Arthur drove back to the city like a man possessed, his phone pressed to his ear, coordinating a team of lawyers and assistants. He delegated, ordered, pushed, using the same ruthless skills that made him a tycoon, but now for a completely different purpose. The next day, thanks to a series of legal maneuvers that cost a small fortune, they had the court order. Arthur and Mark met in the cold, silent vault of the City Central Bank. A bank officer in white gloves led them to safe deposit box 7B. Arthur inserted the small brass key. It turned smoothly. He pulled out the heavy metal box and placed it on a table. Inside, there was no cash or jewelry. There was a stack of notebooks filled with mechanical diagrams, formulas, and observations. There was also a single envelope addressed to Vance Motors. "RDG, the president." Arthur's heart stopped. It was for him. With trembling hands, he opened it. The letter, written in the same hand as the first, was dated 2 weeks before John's death. "Mr. Vance, I write this letter not knowing if it will ever reach you. My time is running out, and my only regret is leaving my daughter, Lena. She is my greatest project, my masterpiece. I have taught her everything I know about engines, about logic, and about finding the beauty in the mechanics of the world. She has a mind that the world needs. For the last few months, I have been working on a project, a series of innovations for electric motors that could increase efficiency by 40%. The designs are in these notebooks. They are worth a fortune. I consider them retroactive payment for my work on your fuel injection system years ago, but I do not want them for myself. They are for Lena. I ask you, as one father to another, if this letter finds you, find my daughter. Use these designs to build a future for her, an education fund, a foundation, something that gives her the chance I no longer can. The real value is not in the designs, but in the mind that can understand them, and that mind is hers." Attached to the letter was a final document, a power of attorney, properly notarized, naming the president of Vance Motors as the executor of John Stevens' intellectual estate, for the sole purpose of managing these assets for the benefit of his daughter, Lena Stevens. Mark, the lawyer, read the document, his eyes widening. "Arthur, this is a bombshell. This isn't just a letter of wishes, it's a legal instrument. He named you the trustee of his daughter's future. No judge on earth can ignore this." The courtroom was a universe of dark wood and heavy silence, a place where lives were taken apart and rewritten by strangers in robes. For Arthur, who commanded boardrooms with his imposing presence, this environment was suffocating. His expensive suit felt like a costume, and the confidence that was his second skin had evaporated, leaving behind only the raw anxiety of a father fighting for the right to love. He sat next to Mark, but he felt utterly alone. Across the room, a lawyer representing the state, a stern-faced man, was finishing his argument. He painted a devastating portrait of Arthur, the workaholic who neglected his own child, the arrogant billionaire who used an orphan as a public punchline. "Mr. Vance's change of heart, Your Honor, is recent and convenient," the lawyer argued. "How can we be sure this isn't just a gesture to repair his public image, or, worse, a passing phase? The well-being of a vulnerable child cannot be a rehabilitation experiment for a wealthy man." Every word was a blow. Arthur felt the gaze of the judge, an older man with eyes that looked like they'd seen every excuse in the world, fixed on him. Then it was his turn. He stood, walked to the lectern, and refused to look at his notes. He looked at the judge, at Mrs. Davis, who sat in the front row, and at Helena. who was watching him with an expression he couldn't decipher. "Everything the opposing counsel said is true," Arthur began, his voice surprisingly steady. "I was that man. A man who built empires but destroyed homes. A man who understood the price of everything but the value of nothing. That day, in the garage, I didn't see a child. I saw an inconvenience, and I acted with a cruelty born from my own loneliness and bitterness." He paused, swallowing hard. "But then, something extraordinary happened. That little girl, Lena, didn't just fix my car. She started to fix me. She taught me that intelligence has no social class, that honor can be found in the humblest of places, and that the trust of a child is the most precious asset a man can ever be given. Her father, in his infinite wisdom, entrusted me with his daughter's future, not because I was perfect, but perhaps because he knew that I needed her just as much as she needed me. I am not asking for this guardianship to redeem myself. I am asking because I love her, and I promise to spend the rest of my life proving I am worthy of the trust of both her parents." When he finished, a profound silence filled the room. The judge looked down at his papers, his face impassive. "Mr. Vance, your candor is noted. However, the central issue remains your capacity to parent two children, given your history with your own biological daughter." The judge glanced toward the back of the courtroom, which is why, at the mother's request, and with the court's permission, I call one final witness, Clara Vance. The air rushed out of Arthur's lungs. Helena hadn't told him. The door opened and Clara walked in, wearing a simple dress, her hair pulled back. She looked so young, so fragile. She walked to the witness stand, her eyes avoiding her father's. Arthur's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. It all came down to this. To one moment, the state's attorney approached her gently. "Clara, I know this is hard. Just tell the truth. Looking at your dad now and thinking about everything that's happened, do you believe he is capable of being a good father to both you and Lena?" At the same time, the fate of everyone in that room seemed to hang on the answer of this 10-year-old girl. The silence was absolute. Clara looked up, meeting her father's gaze for the first time. He saw the conflict, the hurt, the hope, all swirling in her expression. She took a deep breath, opened her mouth to speak, and Arthur's entire world stood still, waiting. In the suspended quiet of the courtroom, Clara kept her gaze locked on her father. For a long moment, she said nothing, and in that silence, Arthur saw a replay of every time he had let her down, the missed ballet recitals, the birthdays cut short by business calls, the promises of next time that never came. He braced himself for the verdict, the condemnation he knew he deserved, delivered from his own daughter's lips. But when Clara finally spoke, her voice was clear and surprisingly strong. "My dad hasn't always been a good dad to me," she began, and Arthur's heart sank. He was always busy, and sometimes it felt like his work was more important than I was. I was really hurt when I heard about the joke he made at the garage. I was jealous, because it seemed like he was giving another girl the attention I always wanted. She paused, looking down at her own hands in her lap. "But," she continued, lifting her face again, "the last few days, something changed. He called me, not to cancel something, but just to talk. He told me the whole story about Lena and her dad. He didn't try to make excuses or justify himself. He just told me the truth. He asked me to forgive him." Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. "He's different. He listens to me in a way he never did before. I saw the way he looks at Lena. It's not a joke. It's like how he used to look at me when I was really little, before everything got so complicated." She turned to the judge, her expression earnest and determined. "I don't know if he can be a perfect dad for both of us at the same time. I don't think anyone's perfect. But I know he's trying. For the first time, I feel like he's really trying. And I think Lena can help my dad remember how to be a dad, and maybe he can teach us how to be a family again, all of us," she finished, her breath catching in a small sob. In the front row, Helena was crying silently. Dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, Arthur felt a single tear trace a path down his own cheek, a tear he didn't bother to hide. It wasn't a tear of sorrow, but of a gratitude so profound it was almost painful. His daughter's testimony wasn't an absolution of his past sins, but a vote of hope in his future. It was a gift of forgiveness he hadn't earned, but one he would accept with his entire soul. The judge cleared his throat, visibly moved. He shuffled his papers, looked at Arthur, and then back at the brave girl on the witness stand. He brought his gavel down softly on the wood. "Given the extraordinary circumstances of this case," the judge began, his voice resonating in the quiet room, "including the last will of the biological father, the remarkable change in character of the petitioner as testified to by his own family, and the evident emotional needs of all parties involved, this court grants temporary guardianship of Lena Stevens to Mr. Arthur Vance, effective immediately." A collective sigh of relief rippled through Arthur's side of the courtroom. Arthur felt his legs go weak and sank into his chair, covering his face with his hands. He had done it. Against all odds, he had done it. The formal adoption would require more evaluations and time, but the most important battle had been won. He would be Lena's guardian. He could keep his promise. As the court adjourned, Helena approached him, Clara at her side. The wall of ice between them was gone. "She was incredible," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion, looking at his daughter with a pride that filled him completely. "She gets it from her mother," Helena replied, and a small smile, the first in years, touched her lips. "Arthur, this doesn't erase the past, but maybe it's a new beginning." Arthur nodded, knowing the road to rebuilding trust would be long, but for the first time he could see a path forward. Later that day, Arthur went with Mrs. Davis to the foster home to pick up Lena. She was sitting on a swing in the yard, waiting. When she saw Arthur's car, she didn't run. She simply stood up and walked toward him, her eyes questioning. Arthur got out of the car and knelt in front of her. "It's okay," he said, his voice gentle. "You're coming home with me." "To our home." For the first time since he'd met her, Lena smiled. It was a small, shy smile, but it lit up her whole face, chasing away the last shadows of her life on the streets. "I know," she said. "I fixed the swing this morning. It was squeaking." Arthur laughed, a real, happy laugh. "I have no doubt." As they drove away, Lena looked back one last time, and then turned to face forward, toward the new life that awaited her. Arthur's debt to her father was only just beginning to be paid, but he knew the real currency wouldn't be in money or foundations. It would be in breakfast mornings, homework help, fixed swings, and mended hearts. 6 weeks after that sweltering afternoon at the auto shop, the smell of burnt oil had been replaced by the scent of fresh paint and new lumber. Sal's garage was no more. Arthur had bought it, not as an act of power, but of transformation. The once gloomy, cluttered space was now a bright, modern training center, the Stevens Vance Foundation for Young Mechanics. The grey walls were painted white and blue, and the old tools were replaced with state-of-the-art equipment. At the center of it all, on a raised platform, sat the engine of an imported German sedan, just like Arthur's, cut away and exposed for teaching. Gathered around it, a group of teenagers from a local youth shelter listened intently, not to a middle-aged instructor, but to an 8-year-old girl standing on a step stool to reach the parts. "You see," Lena was saying, pointing with the small socket wrench that never left her side. "The problem here isn't the part itself, but the connection. It's all about making sure the energy flows without interruption, just like with people." Arthur watched from a corner, a genuine smile on his face. He wasn't wearing a suit, but jeans and a polo shirt bearing the foundation's logo. Beside him, Clara was adjusting the focus on a camera, filming Lena's lesson for an online channel they had created. The two girls, who had at first regarded each other with a mix of curiosity and resentment, had become an inseparable team. Clara, with her creativity, and Lena, with her logic, made a perfect pair. Helena arrived a short time later, carrying a box of sandwiches for the students. She and Arthur exchanged a warm look, a partnership that existed not between a divorced couple, but between two parents united by a common purpose. A romantic reconciliation was still uncertain territory, but friendship and respect had bloomed from the ashes of their old relationship. "She has her father's gift," Helena whispered, watching Lena explain a complex concept with disarming simplicity. "And she has your heart," Arthur replied, taking her hand for a brief moment. Arthur's life had been transformed in ways he could never have predicted. Long hours at the office had been replaced by family dinners. Board meetings had given way to homework help sessions. He found that the satisfaction of seeing the spark of understanding in a young apprentice's eyes was infinitely greater than closing a multi-million-dollar deal. John Stevens' revolutionary designs weren't simply absorbed into Vance Motors. Instead, Arthur used the intellectual property to create a trust that funded the education and training of every young person who came through the foundation, ensuring that John's legacy of genius didn't die with him, but was multiplied. The man who once measured success by the numbers in a bank account now measured it in transformed futures. The final adoption hearing had been a formality. The judge, reviewing Mrs. Davis's reports on Lena's progress and the transformation of the Vance family, granted the adoption with a smile. Lena Stevens was now Lena Stevens Vance. That evening, after a long day at the foundation, the new family of four was gathered in the living room of Arthur's penthouse, a penthouse that was now filled with photos, children's drawings, and a happy mess. It was no longer a showpiece, it was a home. Arthur was sitting on the floor, helping Lena assemble a complex model of a steam engine. He didn't understand half the parts, but he loved the way her eyes lit up as she explained each function. "Dad," Lena said suddenly, a word that still made his heart leap. "Do you remember that day at the garage?" "How could I forget?" he replied with a wry smile. "It's the day I met you. You promised you'd adopt me if I fixed your car," she continued, her eyes serious. "Do you think, if I can fix this steam engine, you could teach me how to ride a bike? Clara says I'm good with gears but terrible with balance." Arthur felt his eyes well up. It was such a simple, childish trade, but to him, it meant the world. He was no longer just the man who saved her from the streets. He was her dad, the man she asked for help with normal childhood things. He pulled her into a tight hug, smelling the faint scent of grease and kids' shampoo in her hair. "And I'll teach you to ride a bike," he whispered, "and you can teach me how to fix the rest of me." The garage where it all began, once a stage for his greatest humiliation, now echoed not with cruel laughter, but with the sound of hope and second chances. The man who had mocked a helpless child had learned the most important lesson of his life. True wealth isn't in owning everything, but in being able to give all of yourself to someone. The girl he had scorned had not only fixed his car, she had repaired his soul and rebuilt his family, proving that sometimes the most profound miracles begin with the most painful mistakes.